This week on the Honor Roll podcast, we'll be talking with honors students Anna Gustafson and Grady Vickers, along with honors visiting professor of professional practice and Pulitzer Prize winning writer Daniel Ruth. Together, we'll explore how we can deepen our understanding of world events and civic institutions to become more engaged citizens. All that and more coming up next. Hey, Honor Schools! Welcome to the Honor Roll podcast, the flagship podcast of the Judy Genshaft Honors College Podcast Network. I'm your host, Fabiana Requena, a third-year student studying marketing and business analytics at the University of South Florida and a member of the Honors College. And this week, I'm joining you remotely from Boston. I happen to be a student of Daniel Ruth, one of our guests today, and I didn't want to miss the podcast, so here I am. My co-host this week is Caroline Merriman, a fourth-year student at the Honors College studying English and biology. Would you like to introduce yourself, Caroline?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be back.
As always, we like to start the podcast off with one big question. So my question this week is, what does being an engaged citizen mean to you?
I think for me, being an engaged citizen, I think within my life at least, is really being involved more in a community and a local level. So not just being, understanding of what's going on in the country, but being understanding of how people are living within your community, what issues are affecting them. And you can do that through things like, volunteering and getting involved in local organizations, just meeting more people.
I absolutely agree. And I think that part of being an engaged citizen also means being informed. So whether that's reading or listening to the news, and trying to encourage others as well in your community, in your circle, to do the same thing so that we can, become more educated and hopefully encourage others to do the same.
So I'm someone who's really, really bad about watching the news. I fear I get most of my news off of Instagram Reels. So, as someone who's looking to become more engaged, what news outlets do you like to watch? How do you, stay informed? What are some strategies?
Yeah, so actually, my dad is really good about this. He like sends me articles every morning, which I think is really cute. But he's like, read this really good article. Um, but other than that, I try incorporating like the New York Times has this 10-minute headline little podcast, and I listen to it like while I'm making my breakfast or like picking out my outfit for the day, and I feel so much more informed. And like I'll try to read one or two articles throughout the week about something that interests me as well. So I'd say like something that's really easy to read is like the New York Times. Um, what else? Like I have a subscription to The Atlantic. So
Wow.
you can also like share like subscriptions, which I think is really good. But
I think that the 10-minute podcast is a really good idea because you can kind of multitask while you're listening.
you can absolutely.
Why do you think it's important to stay informed?
I think staying informed is just keeping up with the times and really being educated because we need to be able to make informed decisions when it comes to things like voting, whether that's like you said at a local level, a state level, and even at a federal level.
Well, speaking of staying informed citizens, this week we will be joined by honor students and Tampa Bay Times columnist / honors professor Daniel Ruth to talk about his honors course, Civic Literacy and Current Events, that is taught here on being a more informed student as well as nurturing a greater appreciation for journalism. All that and more coming up next.
Hi, my name is Ethan Joseph. I'm a third-year biomedical sciences student at the Judy Genshaft Honors College. One thing I love about the honors community, we're all very respectful and we're open-minded and we're willing to learn from each other. Like, we were in a class where we were very politically divided, but just being there, just talking it out, we realized we had more similarities than we had differences, and that was something really amazing.
Okay, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Daniel Ruth, Anna Gustafson, and Grady Vickers. Would you all like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Daniel Ruth. I'm on the faculty of the Honors College, and it's a pleasure to be here.
My name is Anna Gustafson. I am a junior at the Judy Genshaft Honors College studying political science.
My name is Grady Vickers. I'm a sophomore at the Judy Genshaft Honors College, and I'm a mass communications major.
All right, it's so nice to have you all here. I wanted to start off by asking Professor Ruth if you can give us an overview of what you do at the Honors College and some courses that you teach here.
Well, I've been associated with the Honors College for almost 20 years, and I've been teaching the public discourse studio since 2016. Over the years, I've taught satire and social commentary. I've taught civic literacy and current events. I've taught post-World War II history and the concurrent evolution of television and social media. And this semester, I'm teaching a film course. And I also teach a class just on the year 1968.
Amazing. It's really cool that you teach so many different courses covering so many different topics for our students. I'm curious to ask, what drove you to specifically develop the civic literacy and current events capstone course for our honor students?
How much time do you have? Well, it began when I first started teaching in honors. I was teaching a class on satire and social commentary. And one day this is 2005, and I made a reference to Dick Cheney. And no one knew who Dick Cheney was. And he was, at the time, the sitting vice president of the United States, one of the most powerful vice presidents we've ever had, who was the architect of the war in Iraq and the torture memo where we tortured prisoners of war. And these are honor students. These are very bright young men and women who had been sorely disturbed by their secondary education. And so I asked Stuart Silverman, who was the dean at the time, if I could teach a course on civic literacy and current events. And he said, have at it. And I've been doing it ever since.
For Anna and Grady, what motivated you to take the course?
Yeah, I can start. Like I said, I'm a political science student, and I've noticed, similar to Professor Ruth, a lot of my peers are just uneducated, frankly, on current events, on the state of our democracy, on even history of our country. And, I don't want to be one of those people. And so I was motivated to kind of engage with current events and with other peers who are also engaged. I think that's a big thing because, there's a lot to learn from each other. And it's there's a lot of discourse, and we get to hear different perspectives. We have class presentations. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was I signed up for Professor Ruth's class last semester. I saw that he was teaching a post-World War II class, and that was something that I was personally really interested in. I've always been a huge history buff, and so when I took that class, I really, really enjoyed it. And when I was signing up for classes this upcoming semester, I saw Professor Ruth's name on the registration list, and I figured that I definitely wanted to be in his class again.
Come back for more punishment.
That's right.
It's really interesting to see, to hear your inspiration for the course and what you wanted to offer to students, and then to also get to hear from the student perspective that you were kind of able to gain exactly that from the course.
Mm-hmm.
Could you guys talk about like your biggest takeaway from the course in general or so far?
Oh, okay. So far I'm learning that I'm not even as civically literate as I thought I was. There's a lot more for me to learn, and I think that's a really valuable perspective that all of us as honor students need to know. Socrates says that the smartest people know that they know nothing, and I think that's really important in the grand scheme of things, that we always have more to learn. We always have ways to be more engaged, and whether that's politically or not, just life in general, there's always opportunity to learn.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like in the honors class setup, there's so much opportunity for discussion with people of different backgrounds. And I think in this setting, it's a great opportunity to kind of explore what different people think about civic literacy and what their opinions are, how they form those opinions. And then you can kind of base your own opinions off of that from what you learn.
Students take every week, they get a 30-point current events quiz. And
Best part of my week.
So they're required to read the Tampa Bay Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, listen to WMNF, WUSF as well, the BBC, and to watch cable, to watch CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all those outlets. And that's where the questions come from. And I try to make it easy for them, as a matter of fact. Both the New York Times and the Washington Post publish a weekly news quiz.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them ahead of time, I'm taking questions for this quiz out of the New York Times and the Washington Post. So if you just take that quiz, you'll probably do okay. And then I also encourage them. There's a great show on WUSF every Saturday morning called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And it's a current events quiz show. And it's very funny.
Very funny.
And if you listen to that, it also is re-aired on Sunday. If you do that, you're going to do pretty good on the quizzes. And sometimes I'm amazed there's some people that just don't do it.
Do you have a lot of students that come in who are just like have never like watched the news
Yes.
or like really kept up with?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's super important to incorporate either listening to things or reading things into your like daily routine. Absolutely. Whether that's just listening to, they make really short podcasts now, like 10 minutes of like the headlines, everything you need to know, or just like shorter articles that kind of condense everything. And I think it's a really good way for us students and young adults to get into being more engaged citizens like we talk about. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit into the upcoming presidential election. What do you think students should pay special attention to in the media, given all of the controversy surrounding the election?
Well, obviously, they have to pay attention to the issues. We know abortion's a big issue, and Gaza and immigration and the economy are all very critical issues being debated during this campaign. They need to pay attention to the candidates themselves. I find it fascinating during the debates where Mr. Vance the other day, the vice presidential candidate, complained about being fact-checked during the debate. He was offended that he would be fact-checked. Well, that's what the media does. The media fact-checks public figures in terms of the accuracy and veracity of what they say. And I think students need to be aware of that. So if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or anybody else isn't telling the truth, you need to pay attention to that. And you also, you sort of need to pay attention to the polling. We can talk about that a little bit if you want, but the polling is interesting. And most importantly, I think, the money. This campaign both campaigns will spend over $1 billion this year to get elected.
It's impressive.
It's become more and more and more expensive as we go through these cycles, and money has a very deleterious effect on our politics. It's because you need to know where it comes from, and we don't always know that.
Are there some like strategies that you could maybe give for students to kind of find truth in the media? I guess there's so much out there and there's a lot to sort through. And so what's a good way for students to form informed opinions?
I think a good way to do it is to read the New York Times and the Tampa Bay Times and the Washington Post, and to listen to all these outlets that I mentioned earlier, and listen to Fox News. I mean, pay attention to Fox News. Listen to talk radio. Hear what the other side is, that may be on the other side of your political views, may be saying, and then weigh it. Who do you trust? Who do you believe?
For Anna and Grady, what role do you think students like yourselves are playing in shaping the future of civic engagement?
Oh, wow. I think we have a lot of responsibility, as you know, we right now are the youngest generation that's voting. And that's a lot of responsibility for us, and we need to be voting. And this election is a very interesting one. I mean, for me, this is the first presidential election I get to vote in, and
you make me feel so old.
it's a little disappointing. I'm not excited about either of these candidates, and so that's a little upsetting to me. But the role that we need to play is like Professor Ruth has said, like we need to stay engaged. We need to be balancing all of these journalism and the media, like everyone who's giving these facts, quote unquote, like they have an opinion and it's coming from a bias. And I think you can find the truth kind of by weighing those two sides, right? And it's kind of in the middle. And I don't mean like on a scale of polarization necessarily, but just it's in the middle that you find the truth, right? You get these extreme opinions on both sides, and you kind of have to balance that for yourself and find out what you believe. You don't need to just listen to your parents or listen to one side of the media. You have opinions. You are a person. You have a mind. You have a brain. Like you can figure out what you believe, and that's how you need to be voting. That's my opinion.
Like Anna said, I mean, it's also my first time being eligible to vote, and I think because of that, it's so important to stay informed. I think I have so many peers and friends that are not quite as informed as I think they should be going into this election. You know, the power to vote is such an important power in our democracy. And because of that, I think you need to stay on top of every aspect of this election to make an informed decision, whether it's social or economic aspects. There's so much that plays a role in your ability to decide who you're voting for. And especially for this new generation, it's a new experience being able to vote. So it's just so important to stay informed.
My first election was 1972.
Wow.
And when my mother found out I was voting for McGovern, I might as well have told her I was going to become a street mime or something. She was just devastated, and she was beside herself. And she screamed at me. She said, "I bet you don't even go to mass anymore." And I said, "No, I don't." And it was a rough night at the Ruth household, I got to tell you.
Fabiana, I just want to add to that really quickly. So our first day in Professor Ruth's class, we took this like diagnostic test, he called it, on civic literacy and current events, and even some history. I believe he said some of the questions were taken from the U.S. citizenship exam. And I'm taking this test, and I mean, you can ask him. I think I did fairly well. But I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my goodness, like I know so many people who would fail this, and that is not okay. Like, I mean, voting is a privilege, and if you can't answer these basic questions about our history as a nation, about our future, about what's going on currently, how are you supposed to be voting? I mean, in my opinion, you shouldn't. And so I think we have a responsibility to educate ourselves, really. You don't get civic literacy education in our current education system, and that's a flaw. But education is too large of an institution for reform to happen overnight. So it really comes down to a self-responsibility, and that's hard, and most people are not going to take that up, and that's just a shame.
Yeah, I certainly had the exact same experience when taking that test.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of the point.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask along those same lines. I personally went to a public school here in Florida, and I felt like I wasn't educated enough on those things. Like you said, like it is our responsibility to learn how certain systems in our government work. For example, like the Electoral College. I think if you grab a group of 10 people right now, probably 8 out of the 10 won't be able to explain to you how it works and like how our presidents are elected. What do you think are ways that we can kind of like push our peers and people our same age to be more educated on these systems?
Oh, Grady, any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of engagement. For me, you mentioned going to the public school system. I think when I was in a public high school, I took every opportunity I could to take social studies AP courses. And I don't think everyone takes that same opportunity. And while those AP courses don't cover everything, they give you the basics. And I think those basics are something that it's your responsibility as an individual to build upon, to further your understanding of how the world and the country works, especially in terms of government, so that you can, as I've said before, make more informed decisions in your civic duties.
And part of the problem is, I think, is that we now have an increasingly barren news desert in our society. Newspapers are nowhere near what they were when I got into the business 50 some odd years ago. When I got into the business, in Tampa and in St. Petersburg had like a 90% penetration of its newspapers. And you had the Clearwater Sun, the St. Pete Independent, the Tampa Tribune, the Tampa Times. People got newspapers and read them. And today, because the decline in newspapers and therefore newspaper readership, you have a less informed public. And then, you're not going to get the news about the Electoral College or the economy necessarily from WFLA, because they're covering the latest murder or courthouse scandal or whatever it may be. Better call Benkin, and that's fine. But news organizations today aren't really getting into the meat of how government works and exposing bad stuff when it happens. And so it's very difficult to to expect the electorate to be better informed when they don't have those avenues of information at their disposal.
Can I ask him a question?
Of course, go ahead.
How do you suppose then that the media goes about that? I mean, what do they need to do for the public to be educated?
Well, that's a great question, and it's difficult to answer because the resources. The Tampa Bay Times, when I joined the Tampa Bay Times in 2011, it had a circulation of 330,000 daily and about 400,000 on Sunday. Today, it has a circulation of around 100,000. And so, and with that comes the notion that your budgets are smaller. You can't afford to hire more
Right,
reporters.
yeah, of
You can't
course.
afford to say to a reporter, yeah, go take 3 or 4 months and work on this story. That doesn't happen anymore. And so the opportunities and the budgets to go in depth on stories is increasingly limited.
Right.
This may be like a superfluous question, but I did want to ask, in your opinion, do you think it's because the public doesn't want to read the news? Like they're preferring a different type of media, maybe for entertainment instead?
Oh, there's no question that the rise of social media and online news, everything from Reddit to CNN and all those cable news outlets have really cut into the newspaper business ability to reach out to those people. The budgets, as I said, are much smaller. You can't really do a lot of in-depth stuff anymore. The New York Times can, the Washington Post can, the Wall Street Journal can, the Tampa Bay Times can't, and the Miami Herald can't, and the Orlando Sentinel can't. It's not unique to this market. It's just this declining the declining size of newsrooms because of budgetary concerns make it much more difficult to really, when I was on the editorial board of the Tampa Bay Times, if you can't, we sent out these questionnaires to candidates for everything from governor all the way down to school board and everything in between. And they were extensive questionnaires. And then we had a research department that would take those responses and go through them with a fine-tooth comb to make sure nobody was lying to us. And you'd be surprised how often people would lie to us. We had one guy forgot it had an entire family one time.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so,
Oh my gosh.
and now that capability's gone. You can't do that.
Along the same lines, Professor Ruth, I wanted to ask about, since you've worked a lot in journalism, I wanted to know your opinion on misinformation and how you feel like it is impacting our election and our politics in today's world.
I talk about this in the public discourse studio that I teach, where we have this because of Russia and Iran and North Korea and a few other bad actors who are dedicated to spreading misinformation and disinformation throughout our political institutions in order to create a lack of confidence in those institutions. And AI now has come along to make it even more complicated. So you really have to be attentive to the stuff that you're being inundated with because it looks so real. I mean, they're using the logos of CNN or whatever, and they're able to duplicate all our voices or the president's voice to make or Donald Trump's voice to make people think that they're actually saying what they're saying. It's an enormous problem. It's no longer just a civic literacy problem. It's a national security problem.
Absolutely.
Because the dumber you can keep people, the more misinformed you can keep people, the easier it is to manipulate them, and the easier it is to get them to do pretty much whatever you want them to do. So it's not just the people that may not be able to name 3 Supreme Court justices. That's an issue, although I believe that is an issue. But it is also a national security question because if our electoral system is so undermined that you can't really depend on the results, you're going to have a very polarized society, and we're well on our way to getting there right now.
There's this book. It's called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. I've read it before, and I'm actually reading it again for one of my classes this semester. And he says that when you lose truth is when you lose freedom. I think that's something very important to keep in mind. As we're talking about AI, misinformation, when you have an uneducated citizenry, like Professor Ruth said, they are much it's easier to manipulate them. It's easier to influence them for negative purposes. And so we really need to pay attention to truth and what it really is. And Grady mentioned the role that history has kind of played in his life and his education in high school. And I think, we have to we have to learn from history, and we kind of never do, and that's a bummer, and I wish we could. But to recognize both, how do I say this? I'm sorry. Basically, when we look back at history as something better than it was, right? We kind of romanticize a lot of really bad times in history, and that's a really damaging frame of mind. But at the same time, sometimes we look at the future and say, oh, it's just going to be more of the same. Democracy, yeah, sure, it's failing in a lot of Europe, but it's never going to fail here in America. Well, no, it very well could. And if you don't pay attention to what's happening right now, that's kind of how you get into those situations of authoritarianism and tyranny. And so really paying attention to history and the truth of history is really valuable, and we need to focus on that.
I read that book as well on tyranny. Are you in Dr. Stephanie Williams' class?
I'm not, no.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we just read that book in her course as well. And I thought that the book really emphasized, the importance of journalism, where you're getting your news sources, but also the history aspect of, are we making the same mistakes and how do we avoid that? But I think it's human nature to not pay attention to the past and keep, making the same mistakes.
My name is Lindy Davidson. I am the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the Judy Genshaft Honors College on the Tampa campus. If you're thinking about joining the Judy Genshaft Honors College, don't do it. Don't do it unless you are really interested in growing, because this is a place where people grow. So come here, bring your ideas, bring your perspectives, but you should expect that other people's perspectives and ideas are going to be different from yours. You're going to learn from them, and you are going to grow with them. This is a space of collaboration, and growth can be really challenging. So if you're up for that, please come and join us.
So kind of shifting towards how do we keep students informed? I wanted to ask you, Professor Ruth, what inspired you to make the shift from, primarily serving as a journalist and informing the public to teaching students about being informed?
My employment status changed. That's sort of it's a snarky response. But, my full-time daily journalism career wound down around 2018, when the Times was just laying people off like crazy. And I had been teaching out here all that time. And then around 2017, 2018, I left the paper on a as a full-time employee. And the Honors College, I talked to Dr. Adams, and they increased my class load, which was great. I was very grateful for that. And so it was a fairly seamless transition, because I'd already been out here, I was already teaching classes. So it was a fairly seamless transition from daily journalism into academia.
So looking back on your past years of teaching, have there been any formative moments, or do you have any most rewarding experiences from teaching honor students?
Well, I find honor students to be just these very interesting people. They're highly motivated.
Taking the compliment.
They're highly motivated. Their SATs are off the charts. Their GPAs. I mean, I would not have been accepted into the honors college with my high school transcript. So, they're very motivated, and they're a joy to be around. I enjoy the international students. I learn a lot from them. They all come from very, very different backgrounds, and their majors are all over the place, and so it's a fairly eclectic group of young men and women. And about, I don't know the exact number, but I would imagine 90% plus go on to graduate school. Probably, maybe more than that, I'm guessing. And so, they really are motivated, and they're fun to be around. I find, and this is going to sound self-serving, and I don't mean it to sound self-serving. I have found, given the nature of the courses that I teach, I get a lot of STEM students, who spend their school days, staying over Bunsen burners and microscopes and all that stuff, And when they come into the sort of classes that I teach, a lot of them tell me that it's sort of a relief. That's a change of pace from the stresses of engineering and chemistry and biology to come into a class where you're maybe, talking about the electoral college or the elections or movies or whatever it may be.
I think that the Honors College does a really good job of serving students in that framework of looking at the world from a different perspective, and something that you don't get from your core classes, like you said, whether you're in STEM classes or business classes. Truly, the education that you receive here is going to be different than what you receive in your other classes. And I wanted to kind of go forward and talk about what the future will look like. So Professor Ruth, you've worked as a reporter, a film critic, a television critic, and a columnist. What can you tell us about what draws you to teaching and sharing your experiences with students?
Well, I'm 75 years old, and I'm an old fart, is what I am. And I find being around these students to be rather refreshing. And you hear from a lot of people who don't have the opportunity or the honor that I have to teach out here. You hear these young people today, they don't care about anything, and they're this and they're that. This generation cares about their generation's future and this country's future, and you don't have to spend a lot of time around them to realize that. And it's a shame, I think, that maybe a lot of people outside the campus confines don't get to see the vitality and the intellectual curiosity that is evident across this university, across its disciplines, and certainly within the Judy Genshaft Honors College. And so I'm hopeful. I look at a kid like Maxwell Frost, who got elected to Congress. He was 23 years old when he got elected to Congress. That generation is coming along. I heard a statistic that the average age of a member of Congress, the House, is 58.
Wow, that's actually younger than I expected.
And the average age of a member of the Senate is 65.
That's
There
more
you
like
go.
it.
And that's okay. That's fine. I'm not an ageist here, but I mean, we need to start making room for you guys to come along and begin to move into those seats because it's your country too.
As someone aiming to inspire students to be our future leaders, what do you hope they take away from your class?
I just hope they come away with a better sense of citizenship. It's that simple. It's that simple.
So as honor students who are now taking Professor Ruth's class, what do you take away, and what do you hope to do in the future to be more engaged?
Well, I suppose before I took Professor Ruth's classes, I assumed that I was well informed about certain topics. And specifically in the World War II history class that I took with Professor Ruth, I realized that there's so much that I'm missing in the media, specifically, like Professor Ruth mentioned, reading the New York Times and the Tampa Bay Times, watching both CNN and Fox. There's so much information out there that you can take in. And I think that helps you become a much more informed citizen. It improves your civic literacy by tenfold. And so I'm of the opinion now that even if you think that you're a well-informed citizen, there's always more that you can know. There's always more that you can be involved in. And there's always a new opinion that you can form based on the information that you take in.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And for this class, we have to read the news, we have to watch the news, we have to listen to podcasts, all sorts of things, and take in all this media. And I will absolutely take that away with me. I already did that before, but probably not to the same extent. And I'm definitely paying attention to a lot broader of a range now, which I've mentioned I think is very important. And there's also, I've found there's some really fun ways to engage with the news. Professor Ruth mentioned NPR's podcast, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's so fun. It's a great way, I feel for students to hear the news and also stay engaged. And, their episodes are 50 minutes. That's an easy, a TikTok brain. I think you can manage 52 minutes. So yeah, I think I'll just continue to stay engaged and follow follow the news. I don't know. I mean, it's something, like I said, I've already done, and I just want to encourage other people to do that. And that's
Mhm.
kind of where I'm like, how do I get my friends, my all these acquaintances and peers, like how do we get them motivated? And that's what I don't know. I don't know how we
Yeah.
do that.
I mean, I think the honors college is a perfect example of that because we have such informed discussions in the class structure of that when you go into an honors college classroom, it's like a circle.
Right.
Everyone has a voice and they can all discuss their opinions based on what they already know. And so I think a way for our generation specifically to become better at that is have those informed discussions outside of a classroom structure. Like
Mhm.
if you're sitting in a living room with your friends or whomever, uh, just have a discussion. Don't get offended by anything anyone says, but be open to anything anyone says.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a quote, I want to say it's John Stuart Mill. To deprive the public of discourse is not only to deprive people of the right opinion, it's also to deprive them of what's wrong so that they know what's right. Like that's kind of what I was talking about earlier about finding truth in the middle. And yeah, so it's really important to hear everyone's opinion. And
Spoken like a true political science major.
yes, what can I say?
We didn't really talk about this before, but Professor Ruth, what was it like to win a Pulitzer Prize? And can you tell us about that experience of
My joke has often been that it was a momentary lapse of judgment on the part of the committee. But it was a great honor. It was very humbling.
Mhm.
Tim Nickens and I, who were my friend and my editor at the Times, we worked on frankly, an old-fashioned journalism crusade when the Pinellas County Commission removed fluoride from the water supply. And we launched a year-long effort to just embarrass these people to put it back in. And we told there were 3 commissioners who voted to do it who were up for re-election. And we told all 3 of them, if you don't agree to put it back in, we're not going to recommend you. And they said, we're not going to put it back in. So we didn't recommend them, and they all lost.
Wow.
And the newly constituted commission reinstated fluoride. I think these were people who had watched Dr. Strangelove just a few times too many. So that was it. And I was stunned. I was frankly, I was just, Tim called me up the Friday before they made the official, Friday, I was watching the Masters. And he called me up and told me that we'd won. And I won't tell you the first thing I said, because this is supposed to be a family podcast. But the second thing I said to Tim was, well, at least we know how the lead on our obits will read. Because every time a Pulitzer winner, it always begins with, Pulitzer Prize winner Daniel Ruth checked out yesterday. And so I helped write the lead for my obit, at least. And it was very humbling. It was very, very... it was humbling, especially at that point, because I was 63, and I'm standing in the newsroom, everybody's celebrating. I'm looking across. This is back when the paper was the paper, and I'm looking across that newsroom, and there's all kinds of Pulitzer winners standing there. Lane DeGregory and Pulitzer finalists are standing around there. So to be in that company was rather, it was humbling.
Was there something that, happened in your life or something that you noticed when you were younger that kind of inspired you to become this like crusader for the public?
I don't know about a crusader, but I was in college. I went to Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I got a job working as a clerk in the law firm. And I was about to graduate in 1972, and I'd spent 4 years working in this law firm. And I'd also written for the school paper. And I'd applied to law school. I'd gotten into several law schools, and I was trying to decide where to go, and I'm putting files away one day in the law firm. And I had this epiphany. It was like Saul falling off his horse on the way to Damascus, And I realized that, these 7 lawyers that I've been working for, they're very successful guys. One never lost a personal injury case. The other guy was one of the leading tax lawyers in Northwest Pennsylvania. One was a top trust and estates lawyer, all that stuff. And they were 7 of the most boring men I'd ever been around in my life. And I thought, do I really want to spend my life, with stacks of files in a desk, And yeah, they made a lot of money, and they had nice cars, and they had nice wives. They were boring. And I thought, there must be a more interesting way to make a living. And there was, and it was journalism. And I've never regretted that. The only remote time I've ever regretted it, I've covered a few like murder trials, and I'll be sitting there in court, and I'm watching these lawyers. I'm going, "You're an idiot. Why don't you ask this question? Why don't you press harder?" And I could do that, But no, I've had my joke is I've been retired since 1973. I haven't worked an honest day in my life for the past almost 52 years, because it's never been work. It's never been a job, both in the newspaper business and here. It's a joy to do, and I consider I feel like Lou Gehrig. I consider myself the luckiest man in the world because I don't work for a living. I never have.
Lastly, for Anna and Grady, what is it like to learn about the news from an active columnist who helps write the news?
Oh, it's so much fun. He's a great professor. I think, actually, you know what? You asked how we should go about getting other students engaged. I think every honor student should be required to take Professor Ruth's class. Civic literacy is so important. But to learn from him, he's very engaging. He's very helpful, and he's just this wealth of knowledge. I'm always amazed at how he just pulls these random little facts out all the time, and it's always astonishing. He's an incredible professor, and I'm just constantly learning. And I hope that everyone takes his class.
Well, you know what to say about journalists, that we know a little bit about a lot, but not a lot about a little. So.
Jack of all trades.
I'm always so surprised when I'm in your film class right now, and you'll start talking about any actor from whatever era, and you're like, oh yeah, and this person was married to this person, and they had this discussion with this person, and I'm like, how do you know that?
Yeah, exactly.
One of my proudest moments was I once won the silver screen edition of what was the trivia game, Trivia Pursuit, before anyone else had a chance to roll the dice. Couldn't do that now, but I was very proud of myself.
Yeah, you should be.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us and for sharing how to be more engaged with all of our honor students and faculty who are going to be listening to this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, and we are back in the studio. Caroline, what did you think about the podcast today?
I really love the podcast today. I think I took away a lot of really good strategies for how to be more informed myself. But I really also enjoyed hearing about Professor Ruth's career as a journalist and what it's like being someone who produces media as well. So I thought that was really interesting to hear.
I absolutely agree. And just seeing the evolution of how journalism has changed and how it shapes our country, really, as in general. And with that said, if you want to be more informed, you should check out the Honor Roll newsletter and our website at usf.edu/honors for all upcoming events, updates, and news. That'll do it for this week's episode. The Honor Roll podcast is recorded in the Judy Genshaft Honors College at the University of South Florida Tampa campus. Production assistance is provided by honors student Sandra Napolitano. Thank you all so much for listening, and please do not forget to rate and review our podcast, as we really appreciate your feedback. Please join us next week where we hear more honors stories and talk to more members of the Judy Genshaft Honors College.
Until next time, go Wolves!